All right. I am going to go over our first standardized norm referenced assessment tool, the Peabody Developmental Motor Scales, and it's currently in its second edition. I do know that they are working on gathering normative data um, and gathering other types of data to start their third edition. So maybe in the next year or so, we'll actually see the third edition of the Peabody. So the age range for completing the PDMS, we would be conducting that on children between the ages of 0 to 72 months, which equates to birth to 6 years. As I've mentioned, it is standardized and it is considered both norm referenced and a criterion referenced assessment. The domains tested, and so these are each of the different items on the assessment. You will have a section on reflexes. And so that one only is good for children up to 11 months. As you guys are learning about typical development, most of our reflexes are integrated by then. And so, that's why it only goes up that far. The section of stationary, that can be used for all people, all ages. Locomotion can be used for all ages. Object manipulation can be used up to 12 or for 12 months and older. And grasping and visual motor integration can both be used for all ages. Now, it wouldn't be uncommon for me in an outpatient facility for me as the OT to focus on maybe grasping and visual motor integration. And those two domains actually make up fine motor. And then the object manipulation, locomotion, and stationary, it wouldn't be uncommon for my physical therapy counterparts to be doing those sections, which make up gross motor. I have worked with OTs who have done the entire assessment on a child. But again, in my experience, we've been able to break it up a little bit and do this more interdisciplinary. So if you remember in the lecture before, I talked about different types of scores and scores obtained. So in the Peabody, the scores that are applicable are going to be the raw score. And so when we go through each subtest, that's where we actually will calculate and add up the total points accumulated. And it's a little tricky with the Peabody, and hopefully I can tease some of that out. The basal score is received once a child gets gets 3 2s in a row. Again, when I share my example, we'll take a look at this. This is where hopefully when we're moving through the different items, once we get those 3 2s in a row, now that's that base. If they get a 2 on a particular section, that means they get their full points. So when we achieve full points with 3 items in a row, that typically means then that everything before that, they should be able to complete. Again, it's based on a developmental sort of trajectory. Once we receive those 3 2s in a row, then we move forward until we get 3 0s in a row. When we get 3 0s, that means that we're able to stop our assessment tool. As we move forward throughout the assessment, typically those items become more developmentally challenged or challenging. And so then that would just indicate where we no longer need to keep moving forward. There is an age equivalence age. And again, when we're working with age equivalence scores, we want to make sure that our caregivers or parents are understanding that it's simply just their motor skill age equivalence, and that it doesn't have anything to do with cognition or any other area. It's just specifically a motor scale. That percentile rank represents, again, when we're looking at a percentile rank, that allows us to compare the child's score or the child's performance to that of their same age peers. And so at what percentage of that normative sample did they actually meet at? And so Mulligan does a really good job of helping us interpret, right? With a percentile rank, it represents that our child has scored at, or compared to that normative sample, they have scored at or below that normative sample in a particular domain, okay? Again, Mulligan does a good job at wording that. It's sometimes hard to word that. Standard scores are converted then from raw scores, and that raw score, when we convert it, we look at the age range of a particular chart. Okay, so we don't have to run statistical analysis or any of that kind of stuff. These authors have already done that and have gone through the research in order to do that. So simply, they're taking the raw score that child was able to perform, and then they're plotting it on that standard score, that bell curve, if you will, that normal distribution, so then we can make those comparisons. It's really interesting with the Peabody. They also have the quotients. And so the GMQ is known as the gross motor quotient. As I mentioned before, that makes up locomotion, object manipulation, and stationary. The fine motor quotient makes up the sections of grasping and visual motor integration. Okay, and so what those are is they're combining those sections like grasping and visual motor integration, and they're saying those two test constructs or items combine and they measure fine motor skills. Or these three sections combine and they measure gross motor skills. Or if we do the entire test in its full entirety, we're able to get a TMQ, which is their total motor quotient. So that's combining all of the subtests and sort of giving an average on their overall motor skills. Okay, those quotients have really high reliability, meaning that the fine motor actually is represented by the grasping and visual motor integration domains. Okay, so those quotients have really high levels of reliability. Percentiles or overall percentiles, again, a little bit different than percentile ranks. I think the percentiles are overall percentiles, and that's how that child has performed, again, compared to that normative sample within those quotients. And so for the raw scores, standard scores, you'll get the age equivalence and percentile rank, right? And then when you figure out and figure out the quotients, right, then they have an overall percentile score for each of the quotients. So it's our due diligence as therapists to understand what the psychometric properties are. And as I've mentioned, the Peabody is considered a gold standard assessment. They took a normative sampling of 2,003 children from 46 different states and one Canadian province. And so they're trying to represent populations across, you know, the upper the United States, and again they've included some a Canadian province as well. So they'll look at sort of the percentage of individuals who are a certain ethnicity and gender within that geographical region, and then they try and match, right? So they took 46 different states. They try and match what those demographics are so that their normative sample represents our greater population. And they did that based on percentages from the US Census Bureau. They found its reliability through looking at internal consistency of each of the subtests, so fine motor, grasping, and they ran an alpha Cronbach, which is a particular test, on the different ranges, and they came up with 0.7 to over 0.9, meaning that internal consistency was really good. It was saying that there was enough variance between each of the tasks on the subtest to actually measure or to actually identify that, hey, there is a difference between grasping and there is a difference between visual motor integration. So that's important. As I mentioned, those different sections form composite scores, right? Gross motor composite, or your gross motor quotient, your fine motor quotient, your total motor quotient. And so when they looked at combining visual motor and grasping into the fine motor quotient, they actually had really high internal consistencies of 0.91 to 0.98, which tells us that those three sections do make up gross motor. All of the sections do represent an overall motor scale, or grasping and visual motor do make up fine motor scales. They did demonstrate some validity through predictive validity. So this was really interesting. So the Mullen is another assessment that is very similar to the Peabody. And so what they did is they took samplings and looked at them over time, and they were able to say, okay, well, we predict that if you score this on this assessment, it's going to equal this on this other assessment. And so they were able to establish that predictive validity, saying, hey, if they score a particular score on one assessment, we're able to predict what their score will be on another assessment over time. So that was relatively interesting. They also did the construct validity, looking at the constructs of fine motor quotient, total motor quotient, and they compared those with those same similar areas with the Mullen, and they were able to get a 0.8, which was a really good comparison to establish its validity, meaning it stands up over time. So as I mentioned, this isn't just an OT test, okay? PTs can give it, early intervention specialists can give it. There are diagnosticians out there who look at diagnosing or helping justify a diagnosis. They may use this test. I've actually worked with some physical education people, and they have used parts of this test also in their classes, which I thought was interesting. And apparently some psychologists have also been able to use it. They do say that in order to give it in its full entirety, that it takes about 45 to 60 minutes. When you're just looking at the gross motor quotient or the fine motor quotient, they're saying that if you just do those sections of the assessment, that each of those sections could take about 20 to 30 minutes. Again, in my outpatient facility, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to get that occupational profile, some health history with that interview piece, and then perhaps, if warranted, I would probably have the caregiver fill out some sensory assessments, maybe the pediatric evaluation of disability inventory, and have them work on that while I'm hands-on assessing the child's motor skills for my evaluation. So again, I was usually able to do all of those aspects in a 1-hour session. So the test actually contains a whole bunch of of manipulatives, if you will, and forms. So there is a summary form and a record booklet. There's a developmental chart. There's pegboards, beads, shape boards, food pellets, shape cards. There's all different kinds of manipulatives, and I'll show you what some of those are here in a little bit. The examiner's manual is incredibly important. That gives a rationale and description of the items being measured. There's the guide to item administration, which gives us a little more detail in the description of the items, gives us a little more directions as the therapist. And so that guide to item administration can be helpful. Some of the Peabodys have motor activities programs, and they're usually different activities, if you will, that help facilitate some of the movement patterns or motor skills, if you will, associated with this assessment. So when you find out that a child is having some issues with their motor skills, they do have some activities programs that can help, and some ideas. Now, I would caution you, remember this assessment was not made by occupational therapists. And so looking at the motor activity program, some of them aren't necessarily occupation-based. And so, that's kind of a thing that we have to bring to the table as OTs when using this assessment is when we're developing activity programs, right, that we're not losing sight of those occupations. Points of interest with this assessment. And so when we're going through different aspects of or different tasks within the assessment, you'll notice that some of the items will repeat themselves. So you might be for grasping, right? Have a child grasp a marker. And so you'll do that at both the 15, 16 months, and you'll do that at the 41 to 42 months, and you'll do that at the 49 to 50 months. Now, if you're testing a child, you're only going to have them grasp the marker once, right? And you'll be able to sort of tell or measure, observe what that particular skill is or what their skill set is. And you'll allocate, a 2 if they're able to have a really high developmental grasp, a 1 if they're somewhat in between, and a 0 if they're unable to do the task. As the testing increases, right, we will expect a more or a higher level of development, right? So when we're getting to that 49 to 50 months, we're looking at more of that tripod type of grasp versus at the 15 to 16 months when maybe that child is just starting to put their fingers around the marker. Okay, and so it's the same task, but at each developmental age, we're looking for something a little different. But when administering the assessment, we really are only going to do it one time. We can make that observation and maybe just fill in the score as needed as we move forward. I'm going to try and show the different forms on or from the Peabody here. I'll pull them up and show you what some of the different forms are. And then I'm going to try and demonstrate some scoring strategy or some scoring with you to try and give you a better idea. So I'm going to stop sharing and have patience with me here because it's a little bit cumbersome trying to pull up all of the different documents. So right now, we should be looking at the Peabody Developmental Motor Scales. This is going to be the profile and summary form. Okay, so this is just the cover of the profile and summary form. So when we start our assessment, we're gonna make note, is it a boy or a girl? You probably would put the child's name. You would have the date that you're testing. So you'd fill in the year, the month, the day. You would fill in the child's date of birth, okay? From there, you would complete the chronological age by finding out, okay, how many years is this child? How many months is this child? How many days is this child? Prematurity adjustment. Oop. Go away. Okay, prematurity adjustment. Different facilities have different policies. So if the child was over 2 years of age where I worked, we didn't account for prematurity. So for this particular child, he was 2 months premature. And so we could go, we could put a 2 here, right? And we could subtract that from his overall chronological age. That way, when we're comparing him to his same age peers, right, we're actually looking at charts that are have 2 months difference, right? So because we would expect that a child who is 2 months premature might take longer to develop because they didn't have all of that in utero development. Again, some facilities will consider like that 2-year age mark. Once they're 2 years of age, they no longer have prematurity adjustment. So it really depends on your facility. So for the sake of the this example, the in-class example, we would have, or I figured out that this child at the date of his test was 38 months. So he's 38 months of age. You'll see here that this particular score form is looking for raw scores. Those raw scores get converted to an age equivalent score and a percentile. And then they're converted to, or the raw score is converted to a standard score. Okay, and then you add up the standard scores with just some simple math, and then those convert into a quotient. And from that quotient, then we're able to find out what their percentile is with fine motor, or what their percentile is with gross motor, or what their percentile is in total motor. When we look down on the chart here, you will see here that they have different plotting points for standard scores. So if we are doing visual motor integration, and they have a standard score, so this section right here, let's see here. It's hard to highlight, come on. Okay, so right there, or right below there, is the standard score. Okay, so right in this column right here. So that would be the grasping standard score. So from there, we'd be able to go down here and find grasping, and then whatever their standard score is, say it was 13, we'd be able to plot that point right there. Okay. What's interesting about this chart is, if you remember my normal distribution chart, where we have the mean score, right, and we have the standard deviations and those kinds of things, we'll see here. Wonder if I can draw sine. What we have here, I'll just do it this way, right in the middle, that is going to be your mean. That is your average score. So looking at those 2003 children as that normative sample, right? What did they score with visual motor? What did they score? So it would be kind of that bell curve. So about 50% of that population, or that normative sampling, okay, most of their scores, it's kind of the bell curve, hopefully you can see that, but most of the scores are here, right along this line. Okay, and so in the item or in the manual, it will tell you, okay, your standard scores here, a standard deviation is plus or minus, right? And it will tell you. And so if a child actually scored maybe in the 7th percentile with, a standard score is 7 with visual motor integration, that means that they are, let's see here, I think a standard deviation is 3 points with this side. And so they would be, too many dots going on here. So they would be 1 standard deviation below the mean with visual motor integration. So knowing that, I'm able to identify, okay, how much delay is there, right, with visual motor grasping. So say they scored a 4 with grasping. Okay, and so if 3 points is a standard deviation, so 9, 8, 7 is 1 standard deviation. 1, 2, 3. So that would be 4 would be 2 standard deviations below the mean for grasping. Okay. When you combine their standard scores, so visual motor integration standard score is 7. Delete this here. visual motor integration standard score is 7, okay? And then we have the grasping standard score is 4. We go up here, so this would be 7. This would be 4. And so our sum of standard scores would simply be 7 plus 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so that would be 11. Now we can come down here. Let's see here. And we'd convert then that 11, we would go into the chart and convert that to a fine motor quotient. So we would get a particular number here, okay? From this quotient, and you can see here that on the right-hand side of the profile of scores, it's actually looking for quotients, right? And so whatever this quotient calculates to be from our chart, say it is, let's do 85. Probably would be a little bit lower than that. But we would plot then fine motor quotient 85, bloop, we would plot it right there. And so on this side, there's also that bell curve, if you will, where 100 is that standard score. Okay, so some of you psychology majors probably would recognize 100 is the mean score. That's the average, right? That's the area where most of that normative sample, where they scored with the assessments or with their assessment tool. And so plus or minus 15 points would be a standard deviation. So if they had 85 with their fine motor quotient, that's 15 points less than 100. So that would equate to 1 standard deviation below the mean, okay? And again, most of the kids we work with, again, they're going to be below the mean. Let's see here. Here's what the charts, I'm not quite sure if that shows up. So when we're converting charts, and again, this is in the item administration manual or the manual itself. And so you just really have to pay attention to what it is that they're saying on each chart. So here we're converting our raw scores to percentiles and standard scores. Okay, so it's not uncommon for students to kind of get confused in what am I looking at, where am I looking, right? Or to forget to look at one side and only see the other side. So say the raw score is going to be the item number, right? We add up all the items in the column of grasping. Okay, we'll just kind of do grasping right now. And say they get a score of 46. So that's their total points in the grasping section. Okay, we can look to the left and we see a percentile rank of 63. Okay, we look to the right and that's a standard score of 11. Okay, so then on our summary score form, that pink one we just looked at, we would just simply write down and plot those points on that score form. We would flip to another page, okay, and this page is a raw score to age equivalence. Okay, so again, we're looking, this one is a raw score, so 46 was our raw score. So then we're going down to, this one's grasping, we're going to 46. Okay, so our age equivalence, and now this one is the same on the right side and the left side, but we would look, okay, age equivalence is 40 months. Okay, and we can kind of use that because the child that we're going to be going through is 38 months, right? And so really when we compare his motor age to what his current age is, he's doing pretty good, right? So again, you could put 40 months then in the age equivalent section. There's, again, charts when you're looking at standard scores to percentiles and quotients. And so remember, fine motor quotient is going to be your grasping and your visual motor integration. So you add up those two sections. So with grasping and visual motor integration, so you see here, grasping, the standard score is 11. So let's say he had a visual motor score of 122, a raw score. That's also a standard score of 11. Okay, so you would add 11 plus 11, which is 22. Okay, and that's grasping and visual motor integration is fine motor or fine motor. And so then that is a quotient of 106. And then really we should be looking at 65 or 65th percentile rank, okay? Because the left-hand side is percentile rank, the right-hand side is that quotient. Okay, so 106, and then their overall percentage with fine motor skills then is 65%. So compared to that normative sample, right, he fell, or the normative sample scored at 65% or below our child's score. This is sort of an optional chart that I think is really important. I think I told you in my last lecture that in some states, in some facilities, they'll say a Z-score of -2 is needed to qualify for services, okay? And so what we see here is, hey, we could calculate the Z-score. And so we can calculate the Z-score by either looking at the quotient. And so if we found the fine motor quotient to be 106 in this chart, and we have the fine motor quotient is here, we can actually see that the Z-score is 0.40, and overall he's in the 65th percentile for kids his age, okay? So that's important because it's a positive number, meaning that he's scoring above that mean. It's just by a little bit, it's only by 0.40, but he's still over that mean. Okay, again, that mean score would be 50, and so he's over that by a little ways. We also can look at each of the items. So we can get Z-scores for just the subtests. And so if you remember the grasping subtest, he scored 11, right? The visual motor integration, he scored 11. And so that is a Z-score of 0.33, okay, which is in the 63rd percentile for kids his age, okay? And so if we needed to find that Z-score to find out, is he at a -2 or is he 2 standard deviations below the mean, we can find that Z-score right here in this chart. Our summary profile report doesn't ask for the Z-scores, but again, if you find that you need it, or it helps you get a better visual of, okay, he's 0.33 standard deviations above the mean, or he's 0.40 standard deviations above the mean for visual motor skills. Again, all of these charts, you have to flip through the manual and find them. Where I have them handwritten, it's a little awkward, but this would actually be the title on the previous page, right? And so it's a spiral bound book. And so I just simply wrote it on my copy to point out, okay, students, we are looking at the raw score. The raw score is the one inside the chart, and we're converting that raw score to age equivalence. So we take that score in the middle here, okay, and we look to the right, and we get the age equivalence on the right-hand side. And we don't forget to look at the left-hand side, but obviously for this chart, it's the same number. So that's a rundown of the scoring. And so I'm gonna pause myself and I'm gonna try and get organized here to show you an actual example on scoring overall. So let me figure out how to pause. Okay, so hopefully you can see here, I pulled up Canvas, okay? And so here's the YouTube link for my scoring and interpretation PowerPoint. I will have your PowerPoint posted here as well as this voiceover lecture. Here's a video of me assessing my son, and so clearly one of my sons, and so I'm clearly biased here a little bit, and it's really awkward kind of testing your son. So it might not be exactly perfect, but you can see the actual items then that I'm giving, and I'll explain that in a little bit here. Of course, I'm not going to go through and have I'm not going to show this in my voiceover. This video is here for you to observe and to watch and to sort of actually see somebody administering this particular assessment. The sound isn't the best, again, because there's a lot going on in my home and such, but so there's different forms here. So this is the summary form. That's going to be this pink form. Okay, that's the one we just looked at where we have the child's age, and then we can plot down the different scores. Okay, and it has that beautiful little graph. The other form, when we have the visual motor integration or the grasping form, that is actually blue. Okay, PDMS, Peabody Developmental Motor Scales. And so this one actually has, you can open it up, and it actually has, I know this is really bad viewing, but visual motor integration. And so it will tell you the actual task that you're doing, and it'll give you some of the scoring criteria. Okay, and so both of these will be important here. I'll pull them up here in a little bit. The scoring charts I just went through, and so those are the scoring charts that we'll use to sort of find out the overall scores. And then I have completed the PDMS form on my son here. And so I'm going to walk you through this. But instead of feverishly taking notes and those sorts of things, I do have a copy of all the answers or all of the testing that I've done for your reference. I've also put the page numbers of the charts from the examiner's manual that I'm looking at. Okay, and in lab, I want you guys to get your hands on these, and I want you to practice some of the scoring. But again, here's, hopefully this is an example. So I'm going to play just a short clip of this video. So we're doing beating. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys here. I'm going to stop. I'm going to share my screen. And it's okay that you couldn't hear that. Okay, but you see here, this child again was 38 months when I tested him. Okay, and I'm having him bead. So we look here, start at 35 to 38 months. So since he's 38 months, this is where I need to start. Okay, this is the first task I'm asking him to do in the domain of visual motor integration. Okay, if he were 39 months of age, okay, I would have to start at item number 55 at copying a circle. But since he's 38 months, this is what we're starting to do. And so this tells me string 2 beads on the lace, which you just saw me do, and then I hand the lace to the child. I put 4 beads on the table, and since this is standardized, I say string all of these beads like I did. Okay, so you have to tell that to the child. And then they should respond by either stringing 4 beads, 3 beads, or 2 beads. And so he was able to string 4 beads. Okay, if he strung 5 or 6, he still would get the 2 because this is where we're at. Okay, so you'll see here that I scored him a 2. Now, when we score a 2, that means we move forward. We move to a more developmentally challenging task. And so building a tower, watch me build a tower. So then I build a tower of 5 cubes. I let the tower stand for a few seconds and knock it down. Then I give the child 10 cubes and say, build a tall tower using as many as you can. And then I observe him. Now in the Peabody manual, it will say general things like teach the task, right? And allow him to try, I think it says a couple tries or 2 tries, or so it gives you some options or gives you really some specific directions here on, okay, so, if he stacked 8 cubes and maybe you think he could try again, you could probably use your discretion and have him try again, okay? Because sometimes in the manual, they'll say, give him a trial first. So for him, he was able to eventually stack 10 cubes. So again, I would score him a 2. That means I move forward, building a bridge. Build a bridge with 3 cubes as pictured in the guide to item administration and leave it standing. So it's telling me that I give him that demonstration, right? Put 3 cubes in front of the child and say, build a bridge like mine. So Danny was able to build the bridge as illustrated. Okay, so he gets a 2. We then move forward and we keep going task by task. And you can see here he did relatively well. We kept getting 2s. And then, we got a 0. Okay, so then we go forward again until we get 3 zeros in a row. So, he got a 2. So then item 61, he got a 0. Oh, shoot, now we got 2 2s in a row. Now we have to get 3 zeros again, right? They all start over. So copying a square, cutting a circle, and building steps. He got his 3rd 0 in a row. So that means we have hit our ceiling. Okay. And the 3 2s, okay, we've hit our base. This is our base score. Now, students get this kind of mixed up here, okay? We have more than 3 2s in a row, 1, 2, 3. And so why is that? Okay, well, that's because we have to start where their age is at. Okay, now if he were to have gotten a 0 here, okay, we would have to go back to item number 51. If he got a 0 there, we would have to go back to item number 50. If he got a 0 there, we would have to keep moving back then until he got 3 2s in a row. Okay, so then what's the raw score? What's the raw score of visual motor integration? So this is another area where I know when I first started using this assessment, I screwed up, and it's not uncommon for students to screw up here. We have to add all of the numbers, okay, from all of the columns. Now they call it a base because since this assessment is developmental in nature, meaning that the further back we go, so item 51, 50, 49, 48, 47, all of those different items require less development, right? We would be testing this child forever if we went and we had to go back to every single item, okay? All the way to item number 1. And so you can see here, we're already on item number 52, okay? So what we can do is we just assume that since we have 3 2s in a row, 1, 2, 3, okay, that they're able to do everything before these 3 2s. Okay, so if we know or we're assuming that they can score everything with 2s, okay, so here's our 3 2s in a row. So we're assuming, okay, here's our 3 2s. They can score 2s on everything all the way to item number 1. Okay, so we're at item number 58 right now. So we can take 58, because we're at item number 58, and instead of adding up, 58 2s, what I tend to do is I just take 58 times 2, because again, we're at item number 58. Okay, that's where our last 2 is. We're assuming that since there are 3 2s here, he can get 2s on everything all the way to item number 1. Okay, so this would be 58, carry the 1. So that's 2 times 8 is 16. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1. So at this point, at item number 58, we're at 116 plus 0 plus 2, 116, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So in visual motor integration, his raw score, because we hit those 3 zeros in a row, so that's where we end, is at 122. Okay. So let's stop sharing. Let me pull up that pink form. Where did you go? Open with Adobe. Okay. So again, we can add for visual motor integration, his raw score. Okay. I'm going to write big here. But if you remember, that raw score was 122. Okay, so we would put 122 there in the raw score. Then we would go to our examiner's manual. We would flip to the charts. And we would look at the top, the highlighted part for 38 months, okay? Trying to find here. PDMS charts. Okay, so here is the highlight that seems to be user-friendly. So we're looking at the visual motor section. His raw score was 122. So his standard score is going to be 11, and his percentile rank is going to be 63%. Okay. And just in case that didn't show up, so visual motor, raw score 122, standard score 11, and percentile rank is 63%.
Yeah.
We can go. My share screen sometimes goes away, so I have to kind of find it. So again, visual motor integration, if our raw score is 122, our age equivalence, and with all of that, I couldn't remember. So for 38 months, our age equivalence, oh, sorry, we're looking at standard scores for visual motor integration was 122. So that would be a standard score of 11. Okay, an age equivalent or a percentile rank of 63. 63. Okay, obviously you wouldn't write this messy on a form. But now we need to find the age equivalence. Okay, so I'm going to flip to another chart. Converting raw scores to age equivalents. And so instead of flipping back to that chart, it's there for your reference. Hopefully you can find it. So the raw score of 122 for visual motor integration. So I find 122. And age equivalence is going to be 41 months. 41 months. Okay. So go through. So standard score was 11 for visual motor integration, which puts him right there. So you can already see if this is the mean score here, he's already a little bit above the mean. Okay. You can take it again and find z-scores for the individual sections. That's not on the form here. But again, if you want to find the z-score of the subtest, and he had 11, that is a z-score of 0.33. Okay, and again, I have this written up for you in nicer words, but just to kind of go through. So as you can watch the video, right, and go through the different score forms or go through the different scoring, look at the charts posted. So you're really going to have to spend some time with this. And I'd like you to spend time with it before lab, okay? Lab this week, we are going to be exploring this. We're going to be actually looking at the manipulatives. Lots of little fun things in here like scissors, markers, food pellets, a lacing strip, a pegboard, a simple shape puzzle, a toy with a string. There are different shaped cards in here, lines to cut on or to trace. And so again, everything's really standardized. And so in lab this week, I really want you to role play saying some of these things. Okay, now we're going to focus on grasping and visual motor integration for our case scenario in lab. But when we start off, I want us to become familiar with what does reflexes, stationary, locomotion, object manipulation, what do they look like? Okay, and so my lab activity for the week is really going to focus in on that and have you practice scoring a particular case scenario. Now, there isn't a video or those kinds of things to go with lab. Feel free to watch the video that I have posted and go through and try and follow. Where do I start? Okay, where do I end? You can't really see, you know, how he cuts out a circle or those kinds of things. You can't really see that, but I have the scores there for you on how I scored it, right? So you can watch me give the directions. You can pay attention to where you can pay attention to where I'm starting and where I'm ending on the assessment. You can see, okay, where is he getting his scores from? How did he get his raw score? Where are the charts located at? How is he getting what number, right? And so practice that before we get to lab. And then when we get to lab, we can focus more so on what is a 3-block design? What is a train design? What is the manipulative here where they pull a string, or like what do some of those things look like? How am I going to give that to a particular child? Okay, so that way lab becomes more interactive that way. So I'm going to stop sharing here. You'll see here, I forgot to share. So even though I just went through, for the sake of time, right, I just went through the visual motor part, which is the first part of the assessment here. We do grasping. We do grasping things too. Okay, and you can see here we just did some cutting with the scissors. And so when, or for your reference, what I've done is completed in-class PDMS. And so as you watch the video, this one is the one that is completely filled out. Okay, so you'll see here we had the 11 Z-scores. They're on page 123 in the PDMS manual. The fine motor quotient, I got that on page 113. The raw scores converting to age equivalents is on 119. And so the percentiles are on page 102. And so I have both the visual motor and the grasping sections on here with the page numbers in here where I found them, okay? And I did copy and upload the appropriate charts for you just to find the numbers. You'll see here I have everything plotted out. And so take a look, spend some time with it. In lab, hopefully things start connecting a little bit when we get our hands on this and actually start exploring what it is that we're asking the child to do. And hopefully you'll be able to score then this assessment. All right, I hope that helps. Thank you for your attention. If anybody has questions or need me to run through things in person, please let me know. I know this can feel stressful at first with it being our first one, but trust me, you will get the hang of it and you will use this assessment quite frequently throughout the curriculum. So this is your first try, so give yourself a lot of grace and we will become more and more proficient at it. Thank you.